Are you interested in angels, demons, ghosts, spirits, and monsters? Are you curious about their origins, tales, and influence upon history and on the present day? If so, then sit back, relax, and welcome to Southern Demonology, the podcast that explores all of this and more.
Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of Southern Demonology. As always, I am your friendly neighborhood ancient demonologist, JJ. And today, I want to tackle a subject that sits right at the crossroads of demonology, pop culture, ceremonial magic, internet sensationalism, and frankly, really good graphic design. And that subject is this: demonic sigils. If you have watched basically any demon-focused content on YouTube over the last several years, then you know exactly what I mean. The moment someone starts talking about some infernal king, duke, president, marquis, or whatever other bureaucratic title hell apparently hands out, up pops an oval or round symbol with strange markings on it, which is supposed to represent the very essence of that evil spirit. Usually it's in red and on a black background, with ominous music that sounds like a choir being strangled inside of a cathedral next to a few cats. And television has done the same thing. The show Evil especially loved the visual language of sigils, using them as shorthand for hidden networks, secret meanings, spiritual infection, and all the rest. And to be fair, that makes for fantastic television, because symbols are sticky. A name can be forgotten, whereas a shape lingers. And on YouTube, it is practically a law of nature that if someone is talking about a specific infernal being, that sigil is going to be blown up to the size of a small moon in the thumbnail, glowing on fire, maybe hovering over someone's horrified face. That may preach well to the algorithm, but it does not think well theologically. So, here's the question I want to ask today. Do these sigils have any actual validity? And to answer that, we first have to define what we mean by that word validity, because it can do a lot of heavy lifting. Do we mean historical validity? As in, are these symbols truly ancient and traceable back to the biblical world? Or do we mean ritual validity? Have practitioners within particular magical systems treated them as functional tools? Or do we mean spiritual validity? Do these symbols objectively correspond to real infernal entities in a way that many content creators confidently claim that they do? Those are three very different questions. One of the easiest ways to get fooled in this field is to answer one of them and then act as if you have answered all three. So tonight, I want to separate those particular strands. We will talk about where these sigils actually come from, what they were supposed to do, why they became so visually dominant, how they relate to the older idea of angelic script, and whether religious people, or really anyone with a sense of caution, should treat these symbols as spiritually dangerous, spiritually empty, or somewhere in between. I will tell you right now where I land, because I don't like to keep people waiting. I do not think the average demonic sigil passed around online is some ancient infernal business card stretching back unchanged into the mists of antiquity. A lot of what people say about them is puffed up, historically sloppy, and often marketed with far more confidence than the evidence deserves. Now, does that mean that they're meaningless? Not necessarily. Does it mean that they're harmless? Also, not necessarily. Does it mean every YouTuber dramatically flashing one on the screen has any idea where it came from? Dear Lord, absolutely not. One of the great problems with demonology content online is that it loves to flatten history. Everything gets shoved into one big infernal blender. Ancient Near Eastern religion, Second Temple Judaism, medieval Christianity, Renaissance magic, 18th century occult revival, and modern horror and internet culture all get poured together and served as though they are one seamless tradition. They absolutely are not. The demonic world of the Hebrew Bible is not identical to the demonological world of Second Temple literature. That world is not identical to later Christian demonology, and none of those are the same as Renaissance grimoires. By the time you get to the Osgartia material that people love to quote, you were very far removed from the biblical world indeed. That matters because symbols gain authority when people imagine them to be older than they are. If something sounds ancient, hidden, or pre-biblical, people immediately assume it must be more real, more potent, or more dangerous. No, age does not equal legitimacy. It does not equal truth. And it certainly does not equal spiritual authority. It's one of the reasons fake demon claims so often dress themselves in pseudo-history. Take a newer claim, staple it to an older name, and suddenly people start acting as if continuity has been proven. But inheritance is not identity. A late tradition borrowing an old name does not magically become ancient just because the name is old. We've seen this time and time again, even with the pseudepigrapha. So why do symbols like this feel plausible at all? To understand that, we have to step back into a world where writing itself is a charged act. In the ancient Near East and Second Temple Judaism, names were not just convenient labels. They were entangled with identity, authority, and, in certain ritual contexts, protection or danger. To inscribe a divine name or a phrase invoking a heavenly court was not casual graffiti. It was a way of calling on authority beyond the human. That is part of the logic behind amulets, incantation bowls, and atropoic texts. You write words because words have force. You inscribe phrases or names around a threshold because you want hostile spiritual agency to encounter a boundary, a marking that says you are constrained here. That logic is tied to speech, covenant, and the authority of the one who stands beyond the name, not to the graphic cleverness of a logo. Even at this early stage, we are dealing with letters and phrases, not the later habit of stringing together planetary and zodiac symbols into an abstract sigil. This is where the idea of so-called angelic script becomes important. Long before people were circulating demonic sigils on social media, there were traditions that imagined a heavenly writing, a script associated with angels or with the divine realm more broadly. In apocalyptic literature, Seers receive tablets, books, or scrolls that encode heavenly decrees. The emphasis is less on the calligraphy and more on the idea that there is a written order to the cosmos, a jurisdictional and liturgical record that heaven keeps. Later, in various esoteric and magical streams, you begin to see more explicit claims about special alphabets. Scripts said to be angelic, Adamic, or primordial. These angelic scripts often borrow from or visually rhyme with older astrological shorthand. Curved strokes and crossings that once marked planets or zodiac signs get stylized, recombined, and repackaged as letters in a heavenly alphabet. The visual message is, this belongs to a higher cosmic order. These alphabets function as a way of marking text as set apart. They are a visual way of saying this speech is not ordinary. Theologically speaking, the key point is that these scripts aim upward. They gesture toward a transcendent order, imagined as more pure, more ordered, and more authoritative than everyday language. They are attempts to visualize the asymmetry between the divine and the created. The problem comes when that instinct is flipped. Instead of using symbolic writing to mark or appeal to a higher authority, later traditions began to compress hostile or disruptive powers into graphic shorthand built from the same visual toolkit. Planetary glyphs, zodiac fragments, bits of angelic alphabet. The grammar shifts from angelic script as a sign of heavenly order to demonic sigil as a kind of private logo for infernal agency. Now, when people talk about demonic sigils today, they are usually talking about the seals associated with the spirits of the Ars Goetia, the first book of the Lesser Key of Solomon, and the source of a huge amount of modern demonic imagery. In that grimoire world, these sigils were not usually presented as decorative logos. They functioned more like seals, marks of identification, ritual signatures, symbols tied to the handling and commanding of a spirit within a ceremonial system. And if you look closely at those sigils, a pattern emerges. They are rarely pure invention. They are composites, little line art collages of elements pulled from astrology, alchemy, and esoteric shorthand. A curve that looks suspiciously like a planet, a crossbar from a zodiac glyph, a loop mirrored from what someone calls an angelic character. In other words, they are graphic sentences written in a pidgin of heavenly symbols rearranged and assigned to a very non-heavenly employer. Methodologically, it matters that we notice the timing. Sigil systems of this kind are reception, not origin. They sit at the far end of a trajectory that starts with biblical and Jewish caution about names, passes through late antique and medieval ritual experimentation, and finally lands in books that attempt to systematize the unseen the way a bureaucracy catalogs employees. The sigil in that context is part of a filing system. It is a mark inside of a magical technology that presumes that you can call, constrain, and dismiss spirits almost mechanically, provided you follow the right procedure. That does not mean that every grimoire artist was a con artist. it does mean their world is not the world of Second Temple Judaism, and it is not the world of early Christian demonology. It is a later, more often dualizing world in which the infernal is given a surprisingly tidy hierarchy and dressed up in astrological and angelic graphic clothing. If we mistake that hierarchy for ancient demonology, we are not discovering some lost secret. We are committing category collapse. And here is where modern culture does what modern culture always does. It rips the symbol out of the system. Once you rip a sigil out of that larger ritual framework and slap it on a thumbnail, a necklace, a t-shirt, or a phone wallpaper, you are no longer really using it in the way the original compilers imagined. And unfortunately, ripping it out of context has been wildly successful. Why? Because sigils look encoded. They look secret, almost like a circuit diagram of the cosmos. They look like they mean more than they say. And that's because they compress mystery into line and form. They are perfect for modern occult branding because they feel technical and forbidden at the same time. They look halfway between a signature and a circuit diagram. And they suggest that the universe has a hidden grammar. And that, frankly, can be intoxicating to people. Then there is a more recent layer. Modern magic, especially chaos magic, which has popularized the idea of creating personal sigils out of phrases or intentions. Here, a sigil is less a fixed emblem for a named spirit and more a compressed graphic form of a desire or command. You write a statement, strip out repeated letters, stylize the remaining into a symbol, and then use that symbol in your practice. But notice what's happening. The symbol is not bestowed from on high or down below. It is generated from within. The power is not a supposed ancient demon assigned to this shape, but in the practitioner's psyche and ritual framing of the act. That is entirely different grammar from a biblical or Second Temple perspective. It is also a different grammar from the grimoire tradition that pretends to catalog an external spiritual world. So when someone today says, "Oh, look, I have drawn the sigil for Demon X," they may be referring to a medieval-style logo from a grimoire, a chaos magic construction, or a random symbol that has been passed around the internet and retroactively assigned a name. Without distinguishing those, talk about demonic sigils becomes noise. At this point, the question becomes, how valid are these things? A symbol can be meaningful within a system without that proving the system true in an objective sense. If a ceremonial magician uses a sigil as part of a coherent ritual framework, then yes, within that framework, that symbol has ritual validity, and it has a role, it has a use. It may focus intention, signify rank, mark identification, or function as a ritual token of authority. But that is not the same thing as proving that the symbol is an ancient universal key to a literal infernal being who is standing by like customer support, waiting for the correct geometry. Those are not the same claim. In the grammar I work with, any serious discussion of hostile spiritual agency has a start with an ordered asymmetrical cosmos. The infernal, however we defined it, is derivative, parasitic, and bounded. It does not have the power to invent ex nihilo, only to corrupt, distort, and mimic. Within that framework, sigils are best understood as human ritual devices, attempts to compress intention, name, and expectation into a symbol. They can become points of attachment, not because the line itself holds power, but because the practice, the consent, and the focused obsession around it often opens someone up to unhealthy pattern, whether spiritual, psychological, or both. That is one reason why I am skeptical of strong claims around this exact sigil guarantees contact with spirit Y. Even if something hostile answers, we have not proved that the grimoires catalog is accurate. We have only shown that if you fixate on a symbol, name it, and invite whatever wants to wear that name, something may eventually step into that role. If you open a door, you never know what's going to come through it. Theologically speaking, that is not authentication. That is an audition. So how does angelic script factor into all of this? In many later esoteric systems, the cachet of angelic or heavenly writing is repurposed. The same visual toolbox, planetary glyphs, zodiac signs, alchemical squiggles, invented characters labeled angelic gets reused. The visual logic is borrowed, but the orientation is flipped. Instead of signifying appeal to higher authority, the style is used to brand lower hostile powers. You get what looks like a heavenly alphabet applied to what is, functionally, a list of infernal contact icons. In a sense, many sigil systems borrow the aesthetic of angelic script and the prestige of astrological symbolism while discarding their theological center. They gesture toward mystery and transcendence, but the practical focus is on technique. How to get results, how to access hidden power, and how to compel cooperation. Authority is no longer rooted in the tetragrammaton, in covenant, in a larger redemptive story. It is instead treated as a kind of technology that can be hacked if you find the right symbol. And that is a fundamental shift. It moves us from a world where writing reflects heavenly order to a world where writing supposedly lets you bend that order or step outside of it, if you know which combination of astrological and angelic strokes to string together. From a discernment perspective, that should make us very wary, especially because it can harken back to the Gnostic heresy. And all of this has spiritual or pastoral implications. Not everything strange is demonic, and not everything demonic is obvious. But it's very easy for people in pain or in spiritual curiosity to latch onto sigils as a shortcut. If I just draw this, if I just gaze at that, maybe I will finally feel powerful or protected, or at least not alone. The problem is that the shortcut often bypasses the very things that matter most: community, wise counsel, and the slow work of discernment. There's also a mental health angle here. People struggling with anxiety, OCD, or intrusive thoughts can get trapped in cycles of ritual and counter-ritual. Draw this sigil, erase that one, burn this paper, redraw that symbol. What began as curiosity becomes compulsion. You cannot cast out mental illness with a symbol, and you cannot heal trauma by escalating your experiments with the infernal. If a practice is increasing fear, fixation, or isolation, that is a red flag. whether it's alleged, whatever. I would rather someone treat sigils as a case study in how humans ritualize their fears and desires rather than as a toolkit for personal experimentation. Curiosity is not the same thing as consent. So, to bring all this together, do demonic sigils have validity? Historically speaking, yes, but only within later grimoire traditions. Ritually, again, I'd have to say yes, but only within the ceremonial systems that use them. Biblically, not in the way people interpret it online. And spiritually, the answer depends less on the ink than on the intention, context, and participation surrounding it. I do not think every sigil is an ancient infernal hotline. In fact, I'm pretty sure all of them are not. I do think that symbols can matter, and I think that history matters even more. I think that one of the healthiest habits in this field is refusing to let either fear or fascination outrun evidence. Because sometimes a sigil is a ritual seal. Sometimes it's a dramatic prop. Sometimes it's a piece of inherited occult literature. And sometimes it's just someone's very effective branding. And learning to tell the difference, to harken back to G.I. Joe, is half the battle. Until next time, stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to 7 Demonology. Find us online at 7demonology.com, where you can find all of our social links, including YouTube, TikTok, and Patreon, in addition to listen to episodes and read their transcripts. Also, if you have a moment, please rate this podcast and share it with friends, as nothing can help us grow more.